Okay, so once you have everything processed, your volume filtered is written for each of the different filters, all the barcodes match. You got your site name written down, the dates and times written down. Everything's done, ready to go. So now you're ready to start preserving your samples. So you'll see here, I've got baggies and I've got the tape. Also, one thing that's important to remember that I didn't mention is you want to change your gloves in between each of your samples so you're not contaminating your samples. One thing I like to do is put on a base pair of gloves, and then I'll put on another pair of gloves over the top of that. So that way when it's time to change my gloves in between samples, it's really easy. My hands aren't super sweaty. I can just slip them on, no problem. So when you're ready to preserve your samples, you'll go ahead and take one of these bags, and I'll write Salmon River HG, and then under that I'll write DOC, just like that there. So you'll have these, each of these will be in one of these pouches, and usually I'll go ahead and take the plastic bags that are on these filter towers, and I will put one of these inside one of these, because there's 2 plastic bags here, 2 vials per sample, so you can use both of these plastic bags to store both of those samples together. And then after you put these samples in the Ziploc bag, I would place them inside this Ziploc bag. So after you get your DOC samples wrapped up in this bag, I'll go ahead and I'll fold up the data sheet, and I'll put that in another Ziploc bag, and I'll put that in this Ziploc bag itself. And the reason why I put it in another Ziploc bag, just in case these vials break, which does happen sometimes, it keeps any water from happening to get out and ruining any parts of the data sheet. So this is just an extra layer of protection, really. And so I'll get my DOC vials, put in the bags, put those off to the side. Usually I can fit 4 vials in one bag. And then I'm ready to move on to the filtered samples. So you'll have your samples here stacked like this. You'll go ahead and take this tape. And what I do with the tape is I'll take a little bit of one end, just so I can stick it on the table. Get stuck to the table so I can pull it out a little bit, and then I'll roll it back so the sticky side is facing upwards. So you got the sticky side facing up, and I'll go ahead and take the stack of Teflon dishes, put it on like so, and then I'll continue to wrap the tape around, tucking it down inside there. And you really don't want to be putting your fingers all up inside of there when you're trying to get this ready to put filters, especially if you're going to have filters in these Teflon dishes. The very top one is not quite as important because it's going to be exposed anyways, but you still don't want to be shoving fingers inside the dishes to possibly contaminate them. So once you get that tower taped up to where it's not going to come apart and lose your filters, you can put these inside a Ziploc baggie, put the barcodes that are loose with that match each of the dishes. Those go in the Ziploc baggie with it, and then I'll roll those up, set them off to the side. Then you can take your stack of the pre-weighed filters, and I'll try to line these little nubs up so that they're not getting in the way of the tape. There's little knobs on there. But I'll line those up a little bit so they're not getting in the way of the tape. I'll actually take one of these pieces of wax paper that came from the barcodes, and I'll place that over this barcode. Because if you put tape on it, when they take it off at the lab, there's a chance of it ripping the barcode, then they have trouble figuring out where that sample belongs to. And so this will protect that barcode. So I'll do the same thing with the tape, put a strip of tape on there, place this over it, wrap the tape around it. I'll put this stack inside a Ziploc bag, and then I'll take both stacks of the samples in their respective Ziploc bags, and I'll put those together in another Ziploc bag. And then these samples go in the freezer, and these samples go in the refrigerator. So then you can go to your 250 and your 500 milliliter Nalgene bottles, and you'll have dumped them out to where the water is just up to the base of the neck here. So then you'll line these out, get the lids off, pull out your HCl. For the 500 milliliter Nalgene bottles, you will use 10 milliliters of the preservative. For the 250 milliliter Nalgene bottles, you'll use 5 milliliters of the preservative. So you'll see here it's got the lid. Then you'll see this first line here about halfway up. That's the 5 milliliter for the 250 milliliter bottles. And then this other line right here, just at the top of those three horizontal, whatever it's called. Anyways, you can see the other line there. That's the 10 milliliter mark for the 500 milliliter Nalgene bottles. So once you get the acid put into those, be careful not to breathe it in. I do have a respirator mask here that you could use if you would like to protect your respiratory system. I would definitely suggest it. Go ahead and wear that to protect yourself and your airways. Set that off. Make sure that you have the identification number for the HCl written in the preservative identification number line where it needs to go. Usually I wait to write that number after I'm done with everything, so that way if I run out of preservative, I can move on to the next bottle of HCl and then write the new number where it needs to go, and I don't have to erase anything or use whiteout or anything like that. So once you get everything preserved and stored, you can actually take your sample bottles, because it's now empty, and you'll want to put a little bit of this untested water. There's nothing written on this. I just have it sitting in the corner over here. It came from the lab. It's untested blank water. So you'll see how I have a little bit in there. So that helps keep it clean. So that way there's less chance of cross-contamination between sites or between sampling events. So I'll put a little bit of that in there, and I'll leave it in there so that way when I get to the next site, I can make sure it's rinsed out really good, dump it out, and then proceed with collecting my sample. If there is no untested water, you can use 1 small drop of dish soap to clean out these bottles, but you really want to make sure that you rinse it out very, very well, because you don't want any of that soap residue to stay in the Nalgene bottle. And so once you get everything taken care of, you can put your bottles away, put your samples where they need to go, make sure anything that's extra that's been sitting out that you didn't need or that you didn't use, make sure it's back in the coolers where it needs to go. That bucket will get pretty full when you start running about 9 or 10 samples at a time. So keep an eye on that so it doesn't get overly full, so you're not spilling it all over yourself, but it'll be a mixture of raw water from your sample sites and the acid that comes out of the bottles. But it should be very, very diluted, so the acid shouldn't cause you any problems.